Good afternoon everybody, my name is Jeffrey. I'm a radio amateur and I live in the heart of Somerset in a small town called Shepton Mallet, which is approximately, as I say, 26 miles from the city of Bristol. As you can hear, I'm trying to listen to a bit of Morse, which is still used by radio amateurs today. Small introduction to my equipment. I'm into vintage amateur radio equipment. The bands today, unfortunately, are quite dead, so I tend to choose the worst day to do a video. So to try and find anything to do a demonstration with has not been very easy. I belong to the local radio club, the Mid-Somerset Amateur Radio Club, which is based in Shepton Mallet itself. I'm vice chairman and I advise or talk about vintage radio equipment. A little introduction or a small talk on my equipment. The radio I'm using is a Yaesu ft200 lineup. It comprises of the ft200 VFO and the ft200 speaker power supply unit. I'm running a Shure American Desk microphone off the radio itself. My interest mainly is voice. I do also digital PSK, learning Morse, which is still used on the amateur radio. I do quite a lot also researching old vintage equipment on the internet and learning how to repair it. I've recently bought a 2-meter multi-mode rig that goes around your shoulder with a shoulder strap, the ft200, which is known, believe it or not, affectionately as the electric handbag. That should be coming in the next 2 or 3 days. That needs some small repair work done on it. It is in nice condition, but it's got a fault, which I do know how to repair. It's just getting at the part to replace it. The rig itself, or radio, we call it a rig, R-I-G, Romeo India Golf as we say, is a 16 valve 2 transistor radio. The amateur radio equipment was using valves when everyone else was still gone to the transistors, because amateur radio people didn't trust transistors, so it took quite a while for transistorized equipment to really take hold. It wasn't really until sort of the late 70s that a lot of rigs were actually transistorized. Most of them were actually valve, or they were hybrid. In other words, they had, most of the rig was transistorized, apart from the output stages which were using valves. But where this one more or less is entirely valve. The radio itself was designed as a budget radio, but of good quality. It didn't have the walk bands, as they call them. It just had the straight bands, 87 megs, 14 megs, 21 megs, and 10 meters. The operation modes of transmission, as we call it, is sidebands, CW, which is Morse code, and AM, amplitude modulation, which is what you similar mode that you would get on an AM radio. The radio had to have the output tuned, which meant manipulating 4 controls to do that. You had to know how to do that efficiently. It took me a little while to learn how to do it, but I can do it. And the antenna or aerial on the Garmin is just a long wire through a matching transformer, what they call Ballon or Unum matching transformer. It's 30 meters, which is 3/4 wave on 40 meters, which is what I actually use, mainly 40. I tend to spend all my time on 40, and that's how I did it. I maximise my setup for 40 meters because that's what I generally use. 40 meters is a nice band. It's open most of the time. You can use it in the evening, use it in the daytime, or afternoon, should I say. There's also 20 meters, which I like as well, which I use quite a bit. So those are the two main bands I use. 80 meters is not the normal sort of chat band. I go on, there's a lot of people being rude on there, and I don't particularly like it, so I don't tend to go on there much. You'll need some kind of tuning unit to tune the radio antenna to the, or match it to the radio, which is this Versa, it's called a Versa tuner. You also need to peak and match the output to a 50 ohm load, so you need a 50 ohm load, which is in that metal odd shaped half cylindrical unit there. And Morse, I just use a little hand key. This is a Russian one, just what they call a straight key, up and down there, and nothing really special. A pair of headphones that do mono or stereo. The rig's mono, so I need headphones that will do the mono, and also work in stereo on my computer if I use them on that. The story of the radio was that it was owned by one elderly gentleman. From what I gather, bought it from you in the 70s. This is a 1975 model, and when he died, it came to a guy in Ayrshire who, believe it or not, is an American that's lived in this country for 40 years, still had an American accent, and it was for sale on eBay for £225. I didn't know when I wanted to spend that for an ft200. They go for about £200. So I got it for 200, and I was assured it was in mint condition. It had the cellophane on the front, even though it's very dirty. I bought it on and hoping it would be okay, and the guy said if it was obviously faulty, he would help with anything towards getting it repaired. So I bought it. It came in a cardboard box, which was sent to the post office by mistake, because he got my address wrong. So he sent it to the post office for me to pick up. I needed help for that, because it's heavy and I have a disability, and I had to have some help with it. It weighs about 20 kilograms. It's the power supply is what weighs. It's got a big transformer, and the radio itself isn't very heavy. And this BFO is even lighter. It was mainly the power supply that I was having problems carrying. It arrived here. It had the original set of valves. I replaced them for new ones, because that's what I generally do. And I replaced some components on the board which are known to go faulty after a few years. I replaced those as a matter of course. So that's a little bit of a talk about my vintage ft200. I first got interested in radio in the 1970s when I was at school. My teacher at boarding school had a radio. It was, I believe it was a GC, it did tapes. And one day we picked up some Morse. It was on what is known as the trawler band, where all the trawlers and the ship to shore was, and they were still using Morse in those days in 1973. I was 10. And he explained to me it was Morse, but you couldn't hear it properly because it needed a BFO or something to resolve the signal. Obviously he knew someone that was involved in that. I then managed to, my brother actually gave me a radio, an AM radio. It was called a Marathon 6. It was a transistor one you put a 9-volt battery in. Later on I got interested in valve radios, and then I built a couple of my own little radios. Crystal sets using 0881 diodes I was getting out of old televisions. Later on I graduated and met a guy who was into valve radios, and I got interested in the restoration of valve radios from the 1930s, which I still do if I get the old one. Later on, many years later, in only 3 years ago, I met a radio amateur, a person that I know in a supermarket, suggested I went and took my licenses, or 3 to get the full one. I took them all, I took the whole 3 and got the highest license, and decided that I would go into the restoration and the use of vintage amateur radio equipment, which is what I've been doing the last 3 years. So that's a little bit about me. This is Jeffrey, call sign Mexico 0 Papa Romeo Fox, in Shacton Mallet, saying 73, or goodbye as it means in amateur radio. And I hope you enjoyed the little talk about the Yaesu vintage amateur radio transceiver from the 1970s. And 70s stuff is my favourite. I also like American 70s equipment as well. So thank you for watching this short video, and I do hope that I allow or help people to become interested in amateur radio. There's bits in the hobby for everyone. Digital, there's modern radios that use software, and there's vintage steam radio, which I'm into. Thank you very much.